Shek Show ready to roll. We're not going to belabor the point here, but we did want to kibitz with our old pal. We didn't talk to him since his Chiefs lost in the Super Bowl to the Eagles, but big news for him is professionally another great and grand piece running in Sports Illustrated right now. He went through not the best pick 1 through 32 in the history of people in the NFL. No,
Right.
he did every pick ever made and picked the best one. I think I know what the answer is at 199. In the meantime, check out all his great work, Chiefs focused stuff, and NFL at large, all over Sports Illustrated, all over the internet. It's our old pal, Matt Verderame. What's happening, fella? How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for the kind words. How are you?
I'm doing well, and congratulations. I just really love people who take the time to do these completely dorky pieces. This is
Yeah.
you're my spirit animal in that regard. You and I love to just waste time digging up stuff that is inessential and making it essential to fellow dorks out there.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
You've been kind enough to do a few of the big historical stuff that we've done, and I'm sure I will be bothering you in the coming weeks, as I'm sure we'll do one for the 60th anniversary of the Super Bowl. But yes, I like it. I love history. I love NFL history. And honestly, this was born out of the fact I hate mock drafts. I hate them. I loathe them more than anything else that we do in this industry. And I always laugh when people say to me, like, well, why do you guys do them? You know, mock drafts are waste of time. Because you people read them. That's why. If
That's
you
right.
read them, wouldn't have to do them. But I convinced my editor, I was like, look, I don't want to do one. What if I did the ultimate mock draft? I did 32 picks for each of the 7 rounds, none of this compensatory bullshit, 224 picks total. And like you kind of alluded to at the beginning, it's not like Brady at 1, Manning at 2. It is which player was the best player ever selected at that pick. So Brady was an obvious choice for 199, right? Mahomes was picked number 10 overall. Like that's what it was. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of great players far deeper into the draft than I expected. I thought getting into like the 5th, 6th, 7th round was going to be really tough. There were a few spots that were tough, but for the most part, there were Hall of Famers, all pros, all over the place, well into the draft.
I guess that makes sense. NFL's been around for more than a minute here. What is that the lamest joke that am I the 199th person at least to make that joke to you? Like, I bet I can tell you who the 6th round pick.
Yeah.
Right? Is that the number one joke so far? I
Yeah,
apologize.
a lot of people, the question's been like, which was the toughest spot to find. And look, I mean, there were some for sure, right? I mean, not every pick had.
Who is the most random? What's the most random name off the top of your head?
There are a couple of Steelers that were pretty random. Thomas Everett was one of them.
Sure.
At
Baylor,
94.
5'9", hard hitting safety.
Yeah, he was a good player. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think people would be surprised. Like 94th overall, he's probably the best player there. And then I'm trying to look. There was one that was brutal. It was by far the hardest one to find. It was, I want to say it was a receiver back in the 70s for them who was not good, who was not, and yet still was the best ever. By the way, Greg Lloyd, not that he's random, but he was a Steeler at 150. He made,
Theo Bell, Jim Smith.
It was Dave Smith.
Dave Smith. Okay.
Dave Smith. I think, and I'm trying to find which spot he was in just real quick, but yeah, 184. That was pick 184 was the hardest one to find. I mean, there were guys everywhere, and you're like, okay, like there are at least guys who are Pro Bowlers, and Dave Smith was the best guy picked at that spot, and he was not good. His claim to fame, I believe, was fumbling the ball on Monday Night Football before he went over the goal line in Kansas City. That's his claim to fame. And yet somehow he's still the best guy ever picked this position.
What were the top 2 or 3 toughest slots to figure out?
Obviously, a lot of them were in the first round. I mean, that was definitely, I would say really, if you look, I did honorable mention in the first round. I mean, Peyton Manning was pretty easy, even though there were some other greats. John Elway, you could argue Bruce Smith, guys like that. But I thought Manning was fairly easy.
Spaghetti and I tackled this with our old pal Scott Pianowski a couple of years ago, but I bring it to you now. I could quibble a little bit about even Peyton Manning being the best number one, the best 1.1. Yeah, you could, right.
Right.
Elway, I could make
Yeah,
a
for
powerful
sure.
case for Bradshaw with his 4, Aikman with
Yes.
his
Yep.
3,
Yep.
Earl Campbell. What's interesting about the first overall pick when it comes to the NFL versus the other 3 major sports, if you said, well, and I'm saying it to you now, is who is the greatest first overall pick among the 4 major sports? The interesting wrinkle with the NFL is if you make another list next to it, who are the 5 or 6 best pro football players of all time? None of them were first
Right.
overall picks.
Right.
Brady, Montana, Rice, Aaron Donald, LT,
Yep.
none
Even
of
if you wanted to get
Mahomes, none of
into
those guys are first overall picks. That's weird.
right, right. No, it's definitely true. And it was funny too, like Bo Jackson was a #1 overall pick. And you could argue he was one of the biggest busts ever in the sense that
Hmm.
the Buccaneers never, that he told the Bucs not to pick him. They took him anyway. He went and played baseball. And then the Raiders took him, I think it was in the 5th round. I wrote about him. He was in the 5th round. And he was the best pick ever at his spot. So he's one of the worst picks for a team at one spot and one of the best at another. I think probably the most loaded position was 4 because you had Walter Payton, who I went with. Honorable mention for that spot, Joe Green, John Hanna, Dan Hampton, Derek Thomas, Jonathan Ogden, Charles Woodson, Trent Williams. Like,
Hmm.
you could easily argue Joe Green. You could easily argue John Hanna. But Walter Payton to me is just such an iconic player. And really, like, his 1977 season, you could argue, is maybe one of the 3 best seasons anyone's ever had, ever. He basically single-handedly dragged that Bears team to the playoffs. It was hard for me between him and Joe Green. Those are the 2 guys I went back and forth on the most. But yeah, I mean, there was quite a
Well,
few.
the apples and oranges of a running back
Yeah, how
versus
do
a
you compare
defensive
them? Right,
tackle, who kind of altered the sport and
right.
kind of was the foundation of the mighty 70s
Yep.
Steel Curtain Steelers and all of that. It still is hard to evaluate who's more significant. I think you probably go sweetness because at the end you say who's the greatest at his position of all time. You probably
Right,
have
right.
a tick more debate on the defensive line than you do at running back. So
Yeah,
I
no,
guess
I agree. And like even at 3, like I chose Anthony Munoz over Barry Sanders. But you're sitting there like, well, who would you? I mean, I would argue Munoz is the best left tackle of all time. So for me, that was kind of the tiebreaker. Was Munoz and Sanders? You're like, look, Sanders is unbelievable. You could argue Walter Payton. You could argue Jim Brown. You could Munoz to me is the standard at left tackle. Like he is probably the greatest left tackle ever selected. But it was difficult. Then there were some spots that were easy, right? I mean, I don't think there's too many people who are going to argue against Jerry Rice at 16. I mean, there was the only other guy even in the argument would be Troy Polamalu, but obviously as great as he was, he's not Rice. And then it's funny, like there was a few spots you look at and go, really? That's about like Art Monk at 18. He's the only Hall of Famer ever chosen at 18. He's it.
surprising.
And then there were a few spots that did not have a Hall of Fame. Stanley Morgan at 25 was like pretty easily
Wow.
the best guy ever taken.
I was going to ask, is there any first round guy who's not I can't believe
There wasn't
that
even honorable
that it
mention.
doesn't go 32 deep with Hall of Famers.
There wasn't even an honorable mention for Stanley Morgan at 25. Like that, so that was interesting. 29 is Harrison Smith. Like the only guys you could really argue are Nick Mangold and Chris Spielman. And then 30, TJ Watt. TJ Watt, I mean, Eric Allen and Reggie Wayne are the arguments, but I think Watt is more dominant than those 2 guys. I mean, Wayne played with Harrison and Manning, and Eric Allen was a great player, but I saw Eric Allen. He was awesome. He's a Hall of Famer now. I would still take TJ Watt. So you could argue it. But yeah, Cam Hayward at 31. It's him or Curly Culp. Really, it's one of them. And I think Hayward's
Amazing,
Hall of Fame. So yeah, it was interesting. Some spots were insane, and then other spots you're like Stanley Morgan at 25. Okay, really good player, but you didn't expect to pick him at 25.
Yeah, hampered maybe by Steve Grogan's neck roll in
That didn't
his
help.
prime. They couldn't really make all the hay. Okay, you mentioned TJ Watt. I want to come back to that, but when we talk about guys getting drafted in certain slots, the big debate, who did you just mention that made me think of that? Oh, Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson. That was a wild period that I don't think were alive for, but
I was not. No.
With your depth of knowledge about history, I'm sure you've dug up a lot on the USFL, which separated itself from every other alternate pro football league this side of the AFL. It had actual good players in it, and the mistake was trying too soon to move it up against the NFL in autumn. Who was responsible for that? I
Yeah,
can't remember.
I was just about to say.
I don't remember the owner who did that, but
Have you ever
I
read the
don't know
book,
if
not to get off the topic, with Jeff Pearlman, Football for a Buck? It's a great
Yep,
book. And it
yep.
really outlines, like, John Bassett, who unfortunately passed away of cancer, who owned the Tampa Bay Bandits, was like, yeah, we shouldn't do that. That's a terrible idea. And the guy who owned the New York, New Jersey Generals by the name of Donald Trump was like, no, I think it's great. And then just basically immediately put the league in a bankruptcy. Yeah, it's an
If
interesting
they
read.
would have waited a couple more years, I think there is a reality that
They,
someday sees the NFL play the USFL and maybe absorbs, 2 or 4 of its teams.
to be fair, I mean, look, Trump's decision was part of it. The other part of it was they expanded way too fast. They tried to have like 24 teams in the league when they should have like 12. But they had real talent. I mean, they had really, Reggie White, Steve Young, Jim Kelly, Anthony Carter. They had real guys. Like
There's an old NFL, my animated series, floating out there somewhere that details all that. But what was
yeah,
the weird element that presented was, and it was for 2 or 3 years at least. I mean, there was some consideration for Marino being raw about going so low in the first round that maybe he was really going to take the USFL offer. Instead, Steve Young did take it. Bo Jackson, um, you know, he went off. He dumped. Steve Young left Tampa and all that. Those guys whose careers were dented by the USFL experience, and there are a few of them. I think like Kelvin Bryant is a name I'm sure,
yeah,
but he's an also ran in history, but was a high end running back. And if you
yeah.
dropped him in the 21st century, he would be a great back because he could catch the ball as well as run and everything out. A great UNC guy, who now people don't really know much about, Mike Rozier and so on. Anyway, see, you just get me talking about history. I get sidetracked. Anyhow, these guys would hold out and try to leverage the offer from one league against the other and so on. And Eli and Archie did that back in 2004. And the Chargers still took him first overall. And then I suspect the listener and you know how it turned out.
Yep.
Do you suppose that the same thing could play out with Dion and Shedeur? Because all of a sudden, and I do have a hunch, call me a skeptic or a cynic, but there was not the buzz about Shedeur going in the top 2 or 3. I don't feel like 6 months ago as much as there is now.
Right.
And I feel like that is a product of there being a lack of other good options at quarterback in the QB league. And so people talk themselves into these guys. And
Yep.
people are talking themselves into Shedeur. I refuse to believe that the Titans aren't taking Cam Ward. I think they're going to.
Oh, they're going to take Cam Ward. Yeah.
And the Giants or Browns are going to take Shedeur. And if I'm wrong about that, it's because the Saints have traded into one of those 2 spots to get Shedeur. Or at worst 4 to get after Travis Hunter is off the board. Anyhow, do you think there's a path? But the one looming asterisk with this is that Dion has kind of threatened, like, I could Heisman teams that I don't want him going to. Do you think that could really happen, and where?
I don't think Shedeur Sanders is a highly thought of enough prospect for Dion to start playing the leverage game. Like, I just think it's hard for him. Look, teams at the end of the day are going to tell Dion, like, look, man, if we take him, we take him. And like, I mean, yeah, some teams are going to be more worried about it than others, just based on sensibilities. I will tell you though, I do not think he's getting taken in the top 3. And I think,
Really? Wow.
I think there's a real shot that he gets to Pittsburgh at 21. Like, I talked to a lot of people at the owners' meetings down in Florida, and a lot of people were like, look, I think he's worth the 2nd round pick, but he probably goes in the 1st because of his position. And then my colleague, who's as plugged in as anybody, Albert Breer, wrote a whole piece about that, basically saying the same thing. Like, and if Albert's hearing that, then, and I know it's legitimate, and it's not just me maybe getting 3 or 4 or 5 people that are a little bit off the beaten path, the Browns are not going to take him, according to just about anybody you can speak with. I think Travis Hunter is going to Cleveland. And the other thing that's really interesting that
what do you think of that? By the way, to go back to what you said 20 minutes ago, The mock draft thing is so weird to me because everybody does it. It's one thing
Yeah.
for,
Right.
listen, if this is your life's work, if you're Daniel Jeremiah, then by
Right.
all means, don't do just one, play out a half dozen scenarios of the way things could break, and
Yes.
that'll be compelling because you're tied in and talking to these teams and know what might happen. And so true. So is that true for Bird Breer? And I would even say that about you. But the exercise, this cosplayer thing, I've been belly aching about it for the last year, Verderame, that fans now, a large percentage of them now use words when they talk about football. They use the word study. I have to study that. Like, you're a football fan, man. You ain't got to do no studying. No, that's for when you're in school. Who do you imagine you are in this equation? And the mock draft thing is the weirdest. It's like, I don't care about your mock draft, but I also don't want to watch you masturbate either. So don't take any offense at my ignorance of who you think is going at pick number 27. I mean, I don't really care. But that is a fascinating point you make about, I mean, fascinating thing you say about Shedeur. I think that if you look at the last, say, decade of drafts, the outlier at quarterback is the Kenny Pickett draft. Was that 20? That's
Yeah,
21.
yeah, what, 2021, I think. Yeah.
21. That was, everybody said, the cautionary tale. There's not a starter level QB in that draft. Maybe it's Kenny Pickett, maybe it's Malik Willis. And
Right.
it turned out
Right.
that
None of them.
most of that talk
It was
proved
Brock
true
Purdy.
when teams were up to take a QB, they passed on it outside of the Steelers. So unless you think that the 25 class is a repeat of that, I do think it's so much pap. By the way, I'm surprised by the Travis Hunter over Abdul Carter, because if you're the Browns, if you buy Abdul Carter, pairing him with Myles Garrett puts you in a position of advantage every week you play.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're deficient in several other areas,
Right.
but boy, oh boy, imagine you now have Garrett locked up, and now if you drop that guy next to him, man,
No,
you have a real edge in certain scenarios through the season.
you do. I mean, I think they view it as like Travis Hunter could be two players in one, which that is, who knows if that happens. We've never seen somebody like that since the end of the Chuck Bednarik era. Like I will tell
False, Roy Green,
you,
St.
yeah,
Louis Cardinals.
yeah. I mean, they're hoping he's better than Roy Green. Roy Green is good though.
He
Really,
was good. He was
he
was one of the best receivers in football. Him
he
and
was.
Neil Lomax teaming up.
Yep, yeah, and JT Smith. Look, I would say, look, the one thing that is very interesting about this draft that people keep talking about behind the scenes, I have no idea if this actually comes to pass because the draft is weird and there's smoke screens. A lot of people think the Saints are going to take Jackson Dart.
Hmm.
I do not know. I had Matt Miller on my podcast on Friday, and he was talking about that. Like, and that is something I heard down in Florida that they're enamored with him. Now, are they going to take him at 9? Would they trade back up? They have extra picks in the Marshawn Lattimore deal. Maybe they trade back up and take him. I think a lot of people think that Abdul Carter might go to the Giants, which would be that team would have a ridiculous pass rush. I don't know what else they can do, but they can do that. And then the Pats really, it's like, would they take Campbell at 4? Would they try to move back? I think teams are going to have a hard time moving back in the top 10 because I don't think teams want to be in the top 10. I think teams want to be kind of in like 20 through 75. But look, this draft is fascinating because there's not a lot of consensus on these guys. You talk to some teams who look at a guy, and I'm just taking an example of a name, like Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. Tyler Warren was awesome. He was the best player on Penn State's offense by a wide margin last year. There are people who think he's worth a top 7, 8 pick, and there are other people like, yeah, he might go 20. It's a weird year where there are guys, all like Kelvin Banks, another one out of Texas, the tackle, who some people think is a guard, some people think is a tackle. So
The drop off is from like 4 at 4. There
Yes.
are 3 known guys,
I
1,
don't-
2, 3, and then 4 down to 20 is a mixed bag, right?
Yes. Honest to God, I don't know that there's a massive difference between picking 4th and 32nd.
Hmm.
Like I really, if you said to me the Eagles and the Pats both draft the players they should draft at those positions, I'd be like, yeah, they're probably about the same impact of guy. Like if the Eagles drafted, I don't know, Kenneth Grant, okay, and the Pats drafted Campbell out of LSU, I'd be like, yeah, you know what, you might get the same impact. You might, like, I don't know that it's going to be massive. And of course, look, we all know, looking back in 10 years, half these guys will be busts. about 10 of them will be good, solid players, and 6 of them will be stars. And you just don't know who the hell they are. If you knew that, it'd be really easy to do a mock draft. But I mean, that as we go into it, I think the general thought is, is pick 20 going to be a lot different than pick 60? No, probably not that. I mean, of course, depending on position, right? I mean, there's always tiers and whatnot, but I am fascinated to see how this thing shakes out. And I think Sanders is the biggest wild card of anybody in the draft.
I agree with you, and I think Dart also sort of satisfies that description, because if you drop Dart in there, he feels almost like more of a where I could see Shedeur going, like I say, as high as second. I'll take you at your prediction. But Dart, if you put him in there with I mean, that Saints noise makes some sense. I think that if Dart's on the board at 21, he's going to Pittsburgh, and they might even try to reach up a little bit and get him if they need to. I don't know who's going to go in front of them and get Dart once the Saints are cleared out of the way there. Your prediction on Aaron Rodgers. What do you suppose he winds up doing? My sense is he is going to land in Pittsburgh, but who knows with this melodrama.
I actually had a GM ask me like 4 days ago in a conversation we were having. It was completely off the topic, and he was like, "What do you think's going to happen with Rodgers?" And so I think he's going to land in Pittsburgh, but he's Aaron Rodgers. He is going to drag this out as long as humanly possible to get every possible bit of attention that he's then going to complain about getting attention for. I mean, I think he ends up in Pittsburgh because truthfully, where else is he going? I mean, there's an argument to be made, and I've heard some people in the league make it, that he might be waiting to see if Minnesota gets a look at McCarthy in OTAs or minicamp and feels like he's not ready, and then maybe the Vikings call him up. But I got to tell you, I was up in Minnesota at the very end of the season last year, writing a piece. I've talked to some people familiar with him. I'm not gonna say shocked. I'd be surprised. Like, they genuinely are really high on McCarthy. They were really high on him last year before he got hurt. I was up at camp last year, looked great. I just think it would take him looking bad or getting hurt again for them to do that. And I think if you're Rodgers, if you're not going there, where else you going? Like, if he goes to Pittsburgh, they're a playoff team. So to me, that's where
the answer to me is, but you don't have to convince me or Aaron of this. You have to convince the decision makers with one of the other 31 teams out there that isn't Pittsburgh. But the one that makes so much sense to me is Indianapolis. I'm surprised that they haven't dipped their toes into those waters.
Yeah,
at least
they're super conservative with this stuff. I'll tell you, there's one team that drafts right next to Indianapolis that some people say keep an eye on, is Miami. Miami, I know Chris Greer came out and was like, we're not blowing it up. We're not blowing it up. Listen, they are already pretty open about the fact Jalen Ramsey is going to get moved. I know they said they want 2 first-round picks for Tyreek Hill. First of all, they're not even getting 1 first-round pick for Tyreek Hill. He's 31 years old, and he's coming off the worst year of his career, and all the off-field stuff with him. They might get a second. That'd probably be about it, in my opinion. But look, Tua after this year, they could move on from Tua. They could trade Tua, and they're not eating much of anything. And I just wonder with them, if Shedeur Sanders is sitting there, he's kind of tailor-made for what Mike McDaniel likes to do.
It's the same reason everybody liked Teddy Bridgewater to Miami. I mean, it does make all the sense in the world, sort of.
He's a perfect fit for that offense. So, to me, if you're the Dolphins, do you just reset this thing and say, look, let's trade Tua after this year, bring in Sanders, let him learn the offense for a year. We're going to move off the Hill because Hill's only there for 1 more year, one way or the other anyway. We're going to trade Ramsey because you look at the Dolphins, they got a lot of bloat on that cap. They got a lot of older players, big contracts. I just wonder if you're the Dolphins, what argument is there that you're going to contend with Tua in the next 5 years with that team? What is the argument? You're not better than Kansas City or Buffalo or Baltimore. You have no shot. You're not winning against those teams.
I got to say, when everything is predicated on the sort of Kyle Shanahan worldview, but moved to South Beach, when you have an offensive line that lousy, it's hard to expect much from them. And then the defense, the football gods really destroyed their pass rush the last couple of years. Yeah. I am holding out hope that what I feel for the Chargers, or what I held on to way too long with the Chargers, has now transferred. That energy is now in Miami. I believe in that team. I don't want to hold you up. And quick question though, before we wrap it up here. TJ Watt. I mean, I don't think the way the Steelers operate that
I know
they're
you're going to
going to
ask
let
me.
Watt.
Yes.
I don't think they're going to let him go. But would you trade him if
Yeah.
you were him?
Yeah.
If you were the Steelers?
So I wrote the night they lost to Baltimore, I wrote a column for SI saying I would trade him and Pickens. I'd trade them both because I don't think the Steelers can win a Super Bowl as currently constituted. And I think they're getting older and older. Look, if Rodgers is there, I do think this year they're not just a team that can make the playoffs and get killed in the first round. I think they can win a playoff game. They could go to Houston and beat Houston or something. Like they could be the 5 seed and win.
That could happen, but there's not an actual Super Bowl run in.
They're not going to Buffalo or Arrowhead and winning in the playoffs. They're not.
Aaron, here's the big takeaway with Aaron at age 42. When you hear him talking about he's thinking about retirement and he's very sort of like in touch with who he is and he's laying in the water and meditating and all that kind of stuff. Like, does that describe a guy who wants 300-pound fast people chasing him? The guys in their 40s don't like getting hit. Guys who are 25 and at the peak of their physicality are a little more comfortable than the old cats are. People get that backwards. That's the reality. Like it's a bad idea. But you know what? I don't want to hold you up. I did want to bring you in here though, because I really admired the piece and loved the effort and know it's the verdicts you rendered are accurate, although the first overall pick you didn't give a proper answer to. Leave us on that. It's not Peyton Manning. He doesn't beat out LeBron. He doesn't beat out Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he certainly doesn't beat out the guy who could have been a New Jersey Devil in 1984, but instead went to the right place, Mario.
Well, it's because the Penguins tanked like none other, just basically cheated the system.
So what? No apology coming for that.
I'm not judging. I would have done the same thing. I get it. I mean, the Penguins have had a couple of number 1 overall picks worked out all right for them.
Any parting shot you want to give to the show, and specifically Eddie Spaghetti as your Devs head into the Stanley Cup playoffs? His Rags, my Pens, and Kevin Hench's Bruins all missed the playoffs. The odds of that happening to one podcast are statistically impossible.
This is the first time that the Devils have ever made the playoffs, and the Rangers, Islanders, and Flyers have all missed. Ever. It's the first time it's ever happened. So, look, I would love to sit here and exult as a Devils fan. They're going to get killed by Carolina. They're going to lose in like 5 games. They can't score. Other than Hughes, with Hughes being out now, it's like you're praying to God that Heischer and Bratt can do it. I have significant doubt. I would love for them to beat Carolina. I think it's like a 5 or 6 game series. I don't think they're going to beat it.
All right, listen. See, you set the bar nice and low, then you aren't as devastated if it comes to pass.